Hi, listeners. We're happy to say there's some changes afoot here at How God Works. We're adding a YouTube site for the show where you can see clips from our interviews, access our live events, and even listen to full episodes if you like. You can find us at youtube.com/@HowGodWorksPod, all one word. And if you're not following us yet on Instagram, please do at HowGodWorksPod. If you were to picture someone spiritual, what comes to mind? For some, it's a person nurturing their inner life on a prayer cushion, or quietly pacing a meditation labyrinth, probably in a forest or a monastery, definitely somewhere quiet and isolated. They're deep in thought, apart from the chaos and noise of the world. By this definition, spirituality is a process of looking inward, like many monks and nuns, or those who withdraw from the noisy and needy world to focus on prayer, meditation, and finding God. And even if they don't live in an ashram or abbey, these contemplative spiritual seekers focus on the inner life of their souls. The world is a distraction. But what about those doing just the opposite? Looking for greater meaning, connection, and purpose in the midst of the loud messiness of life. Trying to heal the world by working in it rather than praying for it. Which path is best? On this episode of How God Works, I'm going to talk with journalist Sigal Samuel about the centuries-old debate over the spiritual life and how best to pursue it, through contemplation or activity.
A lot of pre-modern Western thought really privileged this idea of the vita contemplativa, the contemplative life. You know, think of like a monk in the Middle Ages, alone in his cell, poring over some scholarly tome, contemplating the Godhead. The other pole of the vita activa, that became more privileged in the modern era, the active life, to sort of like be very involved in the concrete real world, helping people with things like poverty or hunger.
In this version, modern philosophers and theologians said, don't just worship God, be God. Or rather, be as God would be, do as God would do, in the world, not apart from it. And it isn't just a philosophical debate. Even religious texts seem to contradict themselves at times. Take Christianity's New Testament. On one hand, in the book of Colossians, it tells people to set their minds on things above rather than things on the earth. But on the other, it notes in the book of James that faith without actions meant to help the less fortunate is worthless. So, how exactly should you pursue goodness and spirituality? To sort this out, I'll also talk with Father Greg Boyle, a Jesuit priest and founder of the world's largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and prison reentry programs, about how he finds a balance between contemplation and action.
I breathe in, resting in you, resting in me. But I breathe it in, breathe it out. And it's a way of keeping me lovingly attentive to the bombardment that's about to happen as I walk into my office.
Whether it's walking a meditative labyrinth at a silent retreat or walking the 20 blocks to work, we'll learn how all of us can pursue the spiritual life, inside and out. I'm Dave DeSteno, and that's this time on How God Works. I want to tell you a story about the so-called happiest man alive. A scientist turned monk named Mathieu Ricard.
So Mathieu Ricard...
Here to help me tell this story and improve my French is Sigal Samuel, a journalist and co-host of Vox's Future Perfect podcast.
He grew up in France. He was a very, very promising scientist. He earned his PhD in genetics.
And by some accounts, was well on his way to doing Nobel Prize quality research. But then, while studying colonic bacteria, he had a moral crisis. Or maybe more of an epiphany. He started to wonder, what is all this activity, all this doing and achieving really for? Being a brilliant scientist doesn't necessarily make you a good person.
And then, at the ripe young age of 26, he just abandoned this very promising scientific career in favor of going to Tibet, as one does. And he became a Buddhist monk, and he spent about 60,000 hours training his mind with meditation aimed at making him more loving and compassionate.
Ricard allowed a team of neuroscientists to measure the activity in his brain to see if all that contemplation produced any changes. What they found was pretty astonishing.
They saw a brain unlike any they'd ever seen before.
What they saw was an unprecedented level of gamma waves, which means his clarity and focus were off the charts. They also saw a lot of activity in areas of the brain associated with positive emotions, which meant
this is the happiest man on earth.
It's a title Ricard takes issue with because, let's be honest, you can't measure the happiness of 8 billion people. Still, the pattern of activity that his brain showed was impressive. There was little question his years of contemplation had brought him wisdom and spiritual growth. But not everyone was impressed. Most notably, the philosopher Peter Singer. Singer is a key figure in the field of utilitarianism, a moral theory that basically argues we should act in ways that bring about the most good for the most people. And in his opinion, Ricard's meditating certainly wasn't doing that.
And Singer really kind of challenged him at one point and said, I guess it's kind of neat that you have this very happy brain, but that 60,000 hours that you spent on meditation alone, would that perhaps not have been better spent being active out there in the world and concretely trying to help people and reduce other people's suffering as much as possible?
It's an important question. If a faith's spiritual goal is to reduce suffering in the world, is all that time spent sitting in contemplation, removed from the world and all its troubles, really contributing to ending suffering? If Ricard actually cared about making a positive impact on the world, which he truly did, was meditating really the best use of his time? Ricard's response was, well, yes.
First, he pointed out that there are a lot of different values in life. Helping people is definitely an excellent value, but there are other values too, like art, for example. And he specifically noted the folks might know the cellist Yo-Yo Ma, this famous musician. He pointed out, we don't go around scolding Yo-Yo Ma for the thousands of hours that he spent getting amazing at playing the cello. We just appreciate the beauty of his music. So Ricard was suggesting that spiritual growth or contemplation, meditation, is really like that. It's another value that is, in and of itself, intrinsically worth pursuing. Okay, but if that doesn't quite float your boat or do it for you, he also made another point, which is that he also values helping others very much, but he doesn't think that helping others is in conflict with contemplation. He thinks that contemplative training actually really helps you to act altruistically in the world. So for example, if you're trying to be at someone's bedside when they're ill and dying, that can be very difficult and challenging emotionally, and you might be a lot better at it, at being present with that ill or dying person, if you've learned how to really center yourself and steady your mind through meditation. That might actually enable you to be more helpful to that other person.
Ricard went on to write many books on the topics of happiness and altruism, and he used the royalties from those books to start a charity to fund education, healthcare, and environmental projects. So his embrace of the vita contemplativa, which led to the wisdom he shared, did benefit the world. His contemplative life enabled him to do more than he otherwise might have. The point here is, it doesn't have to be all or none. It's an approach to spirituality that informs Sigal's thinking too.
I'm almost always going to say let's try and balance multiple values, because I believe there's a lot of different distinct values, and sometimes they're incommensurable or incomparable, but we should appreciate them each on their own terms and kind of find some way to honor that value. There's another famous Buddhist teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, and he said we should not have this dualistic thinking between contemplation on the one hand or action on the other. That's sort of like a false dichotomy. In fact, they both are mutually enhancing. If you have never gone out into the world and seen concretely the misery and the suffering and felt anger and felt this and felt that, your contemplation is going to be pretty empty. You need to experience the suffering in the world to know what it is that we're seeking liberation from. I feel like there is no better way to tap into certain spiritual insights than to be very actively engaged in the concrete, earthy stuff of life.
He taught mindfulness as a way to connect the two, helping people to channel the awareness they cultivated during meditation into practices like mindful listening and loving speech, tools of compassionate communication that are at the core of many successful efforts to build community and care in the world. Herein lies the wisdom behind taking a balanced approach. Developing your inner life can make you more effective at helping the world. Put simply, contemplation can make you more resilient by making you more present.
I can be fully present for this current moment I'm in, not kind of caught up in regrets about the past or anxieties about the future, as our brains very often are, but just noticing the present moment and what the present moment demands of me, and then awareness, mindfulness of our own emotion, which might be like, ouch, or like stress, or like, ugh, I don't want to deal with this, but like noticing whatever feeling is coming up, and then having like hopefully a little room there for, let me try to like reach toward that person physically or emotionally and try to reduce their suffering if I can.
But the experience in the trenches, in the joys and sorrows of life, of knowing what others are feeling, even if they're not willing to voice it, that can enrich your prayer or meditation by helping you to understand more vividly what suffering means. And in that way, make your vita contemplativa more effective too. While accepting the notion that balance is important can be helpful, it doesn't quite provide the whole answer about how to follow a spiritual path. After all, balance can look different for everyone. For Mathieu Ricard, it was a long path that involved nearly 3 decades of meditation practice. For Father Greg Boyle, it's a shorter path, like a 30-second meditation on the walk from his car to his office.
Yeah, this is our headquarters in Chinatown in downtown Los Angeles. So about 10,000 folks walk through the doors here.
That bombardment was evident on the day I talked with Father Greg at his office in Homeboy Industries, a nonprofit he founded over 30 years ago that has become one of the largest gang intervention and rehabilitation programs in the world.
Today is orientation day, so people who want to come into our 18-month program come for orientation. So it's a packed reception area to basically kind of present who we are and see if that's what they still want to join.
Can you pinpoint a moment, or was there a specific moment when you decided that you had to really get involved with the city gang community? Was it a divine calling, or just a need to say, I have to step up and do something?
Yeah, I don't think I ever operated that way. It's just something presents itself in the same way somebody gets shot, you go to the hospital, or you bury a kid, or you console a mother. So I was pastor of a very poor parish in Los Angeles, the poorest, and it was nestled in the middle of 2 public housing projects, and we had 8 gangs at war with each other during the time that I was pastor. In 1988, I buried my first young person killed because of gang violence, and I've buried 263 since then. And then it became a vocation within a vocation within a vocation. So I've been doing it now for almost 40 years, I guess. You put one foot in front of the next.
The organization eventually evolved from providing these immediate services ad hoc, like a ride to the hospital or emotional support for grieving loved ones, to a focus on long-term needs, like jobs and education for the formerly incarcerated who were struggling to re-enter society.
We couldn't find enough people willing to hire folks, so we just started a school, we started a jobs program, then we started to create businesses, social enterprises. So there was never a lot of staring and waiting and planning and what's our strategy going to be. They always say, look before you leap, but leap. And I always try to leap. It's like staring at a chessboard and you're just staring at it because you don't know what the next move is. But you got to make a move. You got to move something, a pawn, a bishop, something.
It's a remarkable feat, and one that was directly focused on the Vita Activa. Father Greg saw there were problems to solve and jumped in, because, first, he's clearly just a really good guy, but also because of the religious tradition he comes from. As a Jesuit, Father Greg is part of a Catholic order that emphasizes education and service, tackling huge issues like poverty, oppression, and environmental degradation. In this spiritual tradition, you connect with God not only through prayer, but through people in the world, especially the poor and suffering. To Father Greg, it was this activity, the doing of God's work in the world, that made the Jesuit style of spirituality so appealing.
I found them to be hilarious. So they were just joyful. They were really fun. And they were prophetic. So this was during the time of the Vietnam War. So they took a stand, and I like that. I like the combo burger of hilarity and prophetic. I think later on in my life, I would probably characterize it as fearlessness and joy, and which I think are the marks of authentic following of Jesus. It just proceeds full speed ahead.
Father Greg, even at 71 years old, is clearly a man of action, a doer and a do-gooder to the extreme. He thrives on being with people in the mix of life.
God protects me from nothing, but sustains me in everything. And in order to be sustained in everything, you have to kind of check in. You have to, be mindful at every moment to our own duty to delight in the person who's in front of you. It's hard to do. You have to pay attention.
Which is where Father Greg's inner life comes into play. Action alone can wear you down in the face of trials if you don't have a strong inner life. And while it's true that some people can do well focusing solely on one route or the other, as Christian monastics and Buddhist monks do on one hand, and some devoted public servants do on the other, for Jesuits and many other religious traditions, it's more of a combo. While Jesuits are known for doing service out in the world, they also have their own traditions of inwardly focused spiritual exercises to force them to stop, reflect, check in, and prevent against spiritually empty action. They go on retreats for weeks at a time, sometimes silent, where they focus on contemplative exercises recommended by the founder of their order, St. Ignatius of Loyola. And for Father Greg, these are profound and necessary moments to spiritually recharge.
The first week, I don't know, it was the most overpowering sense of gratitude and connection. And again, it's a total alignment of your heart. All I did was cry.
I know when people have spiritual experiences like that, where they can sense God's love, it can often lead them to want to pursue a contemplative life, to kind of withdraw from society, right, and work on their own spiritual growth. But it seems like for other people, and I'm guessing for you, it might be something different. That is, it pushes you not to withdraw from the world, but rather to be in it, especially in difficult places. So I'm wondering how that experience of God shaped your view of your work or your purpose here. Can you experience God's love without wanting to bring it to the world, I guess is what I'm asking.
I could never embrace something that just removed me from relational wholeness in the world.
This balance of prayer and activity is what Jesuits call being contemplatives in action.
Cherishing people is not hard, but remembering to cherish is really difficult. But remembering to cherish is born of people's own practice. Meditation, reading, taking time out, where you can find the ground of your being and you can find your center. I really get up impossibly early, but I walk and pray and drink coffee and read a little bit. And, it's a lot of hours before I finally show up here at the office. But it's a way to begin and to find your anchor so that you can touch your anchor throughout the course of the day. Find your center and return to it. It's a misconception to think that there's anything once and for all or one and done, like I prayed this morning, I'm good to go for the whole day. Well, we're never good to go, because we always have to renew and stay anchored in that spirit that we encounter in our own solitude in prayer. So that's important to kind of nurture that throughout the course of the day.
In this cycle of doing, stopping, reflecting, recharging, doing again, is where the contemplative and active life interact for Father Greg, renewing one another constantly. Father Greg has tools to keep him present in his daily life, but don't confuse that with spiritual life hacks. He says there's no shortcut. It's something he once told a former gang member who asked, "How do I become more spiritual?"
I found myself telling him, don't do that, whatever you do, because part of the thing is that's how we think that, yesterday I wasn't that spiritual, but I'm way more spiritual today. And you go, well, what do you think that means? It means a settling for piety, which is not that helpful. Why would we settle for piety when we could hold out for actual holiness? And holiness is about being whole and well. So, the whole point is not to kind of wave your hands and say, God's pretty great, but to choose to be in the world who God is, compassionate, loving, and kind.
Right here is the distinction Father Greg made before, between being pious and being truly holy as he sees it. This is what Homeboy Industries teaches those who go through the program. Not necessarily how to be holy, though it is run by a priest. Father Greg says it's not pushing religion or God on anyone, but teaching how to be loving and compassionate to oneself and one another, which is a pretty radical message for some who have come through life with little feeling of worth or goodness. In this act of self-acceptance, the act of coming together, some people do find a path to spirituality in many forms.
It's kind of become a little bit the Church of Homeboy, a little bit. I had a homie in my office, in this office, who was just sobbing, just wailing, sobbing. And I think he just felt the weight of all his life and trauma and torture and abuse. And it just came crashing down. And then he asked the God question. He says, has God disowned me? And before I could say anything, through his tears, he says, have you? And I returned to that for myself, because that's the dynamic. That's how it should be working. It's not telling him stuff about God, which I have no interest in, but trying to be in the world who God is, where this guy is convinced that we are in fact siblings of divine love and we're connected. And there is no disowning that's happening, only cherishing. And then that becomes kind of a balm, where people feel soothed. And if the real issue at the moment is kind of a shared anguish that we all participate in, then this is the only way to soothe each other, is to be well-wishers, to walk people home.
People like Father Greg and Matthew Ricard kind of anchor the rock star poles of spirituality. They're extreme examples. But that doesn't mean you have to meditate for decades or found an organization to grow spiritually. And as each of them point out in their own way, you don't have to choose solely the active or the contemplative route. But while finding the active one can seem straightforward, volunteering to help people in need, spending some time working for a good cause, doing the contemplative one might seem a bit trickier at first, especially if, like Sigal, you lead a busy life.
When you're living in a culture like ours, which is designed to fragment our attention at every single turn, our culture does not make it easy to kind of cultivate a contemplative headspace. Even in the framework of a super active life, which a lot of us are living, we can find those little doorways into contemplation. We all take it for granted that it's worth spending 2 minutes out of our day brushing our teeth for dental hygiene. And yet we find it so odd to spend even just 2 minutes meditating or practicing mindfulness. And if everyone would just spend 2 minutes, the time it takes to brush your teeth, on contemplation or sort of spiritual pursuits, the world might be different. One quote by Thich Nhat Hanh that I often think of nearly every day is, washing the dishes is bathing a baby Buddha. So he's trying to convey, I think, that even in these very mundane, small moments in the day, you can tune into that sort of mindful awareness and just be like really aware of the sensation of warm water on your hands, or like the motion of cleaning the dish. Even if you've only got 2 minutes while it's brushing your teeth or washing the dishes, contemplation does not have to be so far out of reach. And that ultimately, like, that is not just going to be of benefit to you. It's with the idea that it will be to the benefit of everyone you interact with.
I'm going to think about that tonight as I wash the dishes. See, I'm washing the baby Buddha. Thank you. Next time on How God Works, what does it really mean to be wise? Is it something you're born with? Or is it more like a skill you can develop to help you face life's toughest moments?
In this context of radical uncertainty, what would be the strategies that can help you navigate this uncertainty? What are the psychological approaches that can help you figure out what to do?
As it turns out, spiritual traditions have been training people to develop those strategies for millennia.
If we become more mindful of what we have been doing throughout the day, then in the moment when it happens, we'll be prepared for it. We'll be mentally present to it.
Join us next time as we explore what all of us can do to build more wisdom into our daily lives. How God Works is hosted by me, Dave DeSteno. This episode was written by Josie Holtzman and me. Our senior producer is Josie Holtzman. Our producer is Sophie Eisenberg. Our associate producer is Emmanuel Desarme. Executive producer is Genevieve Sponsler. Merritt Jacob is our mix engineer and composed our theme, which was arranged by Chloe DeSteno. The executive producer of PRX Productions is Jocelyn Gonzalez. This podcast was also made possible with support from the John Templeton Foundation. To learn more about the show and access episode transcripts, you can find our website at howgodworks, all one word, .org. And for news and peeks at what's coming, feel free to follow us on Instagram at howgodworkspod, or me on X or Blue Sky at David DeSteno. If you have other questions for Sigal about spirituality or anything else, feel free to submit them to Your Mileage May Vary, her excellent advice column. You can find a link in the show notes.